Today, I'm going to explain a mystery thriller movie called Instinct. Spoilers ahead, watch out, and take care. The movie begins in a makeshift prison in Uganda, where anthropologist Dr. Ethan Powell is currently being held. He is an old man who looks unkempt, indicating that he has been away from human civilization for a long time. Ethan is soon taken out of the prison and extradited to the United States. He is then handed over to the officials from the U.S. State Department at the airport. Elsewhere in the University of Miami, a young and upcoming psychiatrist, Dr. Theo Calder, is conducting a therapy session with a female patient. His professor, Dr. Ben Halding, along with several students, are watching this session from a nearby room. Theo carefully listens to his patient, and instead of simply diagnosing the problem, he tries to befriend her. This way, he gains access to the patient's perspective and understands her suffering even better. Eventually, he gets her to realize that she might be suffering from some sort of mental illness and that he can be of help. It is obvious that Theo is an extremely intelligent and resourceful psychiatrist. After the session, Dr. Ben hands Theo his new task: get an evaluation of Ethan Powell, who is currently being flown to the US. It is revealed that Ethan had gone missing in the Ugandan forests 2 years ago. He is currently under arrest for the murder of 2 park rangers. Sometime later, the US state agents land at the Miami International Airport along with Ethan. They take him straight to a holding room where criminals who have been extradited are kept. Everything seems to be going according to protocol until the door of the holding room doesn't open. None of the agents have the key, and one officer tries to forcefully unlock the door. This sets off an alarm which causes confusion among everyone. Unbeknownst to them, the loud noise begins to irritate Ethan. He has stayed in the jungle for the past 2 years, in peace and tranquility. Since the alarm noise is very sharp, Ethan cannot bear it. He thus pushes a few guards and runs away from the spot. Soon, the news is relayed to the security at the airport, and several cops try to stop him from fleeing. But Ethan is too dexterous with his movements. He's been training with the monkeys and dodges everyone in his path. When the cops eventually corner him, Ethan begins to beat anyone he can get his hands on. He only stops when he gets a glimpse of his daughter, Liv, who had been waiting for his arrival in the airport's lounge. Ethan is then subdued by several cops and taken into custody. Back at the University of Miami, Theo has been doing some research on Ethan's case. It is revealed that the anthropologist was reported to be walking and living among the mountain gorillas. In Virunga Forest, Uganda. He was captured by the local authorities after killing 2 park rangers and put into an African prison for a year. Ever since that incident, Ethan hasn't uttered a word to anyone. The US authorities have given Ethan a 30-day evaluation period before he is presented in court. Hence, Theo convinces his senior to get him the jurisdiction of that evaluation period. On the other hand, Ethan is now being kept at Harmony Bay Correctional Facility, where several mentally challenged criminals are awaiting their psychological examinations. The facility has a weird system where the prisoners are given a card each day. The person who gets the ace of diamonds is allowed to spend 30 minutes in the fresh air. However, a big, muscular prisoner named Trey bullies whoever has got the card and snatches the fresh air time for himself. The following day, Theo arrives at Harmony Bay and is informed about his duties. Turns out, he has been given the full jurisdiction of Ethan's 30-day evaluation period under one condition. Theo will have to work as a temporary staff in the prison's psychiatric department. He begrudgingly agrees to the conditions and sets up a meeting with Ethan. Shortly afterwards, Theo has his first session with the anthropologist in an empty storage room. There are 2 guards present there who give Theo the rules to be followed during the process. He cannot give or take any unauthorized object from the prisoner and is not allowed to come too close either. Shortly after, Theo takes out his bag so that the guards can see the things he will use during the session. He then starts a tape recorder before handing over a paper and pencil to Ethan. Initially, the interview goes smoothly as Theo uses all his charm and intelligence to form a connection with his patient. He tells Ethan that he can stay silent all he wants during the rest of the day. But when they are sitting down for these sessions, it is an opportunity to pour out his feelings. Theo then slides over the pencil and paper towards his patient before asking a few introductory questions. This is when things begin to go bad, as the prison guards, due to the nature of their job, become more and more concerned. When Ethan reaches across the table to give back the pencil, the guards see this as a dangerous act. They quickly jump on Ethan and subdue him with ferocious intensity. This act enrages Theo, so he chastises the guards and terminates the first session immediately. Later, Theo gets to know that the psychiatric patients at Harmony Bay are injected with an extremely high quantity of meds. He complains to the warden about this rough treatment and asks for the dosages to be brought down. However, the warden doesn't take him seriously and brushes off his requests. After a while, the prison's chief guard distributes the cards to all patients, and Ethan gets the ace of diamonds. In his excitement, Ethan says, Lunchtime arrives and all the psychiatric patients gather in the gymnasium. As usual, the big bully Trey arrives and threatens everyone to show their cards. He eventually makes his way to Ethan, who is quietly sitting with his eyes facing downwards. Trey gives him a push and asks to see his card, but the latter doesn't budge. Enraged, the bully smacks Ethan across the face and tries to check his pocket, but this is when our hero springs into action and knocks the bully down. He then strangles Trey, but before anything unfortunate can happen, the guards intervene. Ethan is about to be sent back to his cell when the other inmates point out that he has the ace of diamonds. The anthropologist is thus given 30 minutes of fresh air in the prison's park. Turns out this park is nothing more than a small enclosed piece of land surrounded by tall walls. On the other hand, Theo goes to Ethan's house to dig out personal information about his patient. He takes a picture of the house before entering, where he is warmly greeted by Liv. The two then begin to have a conversation about Ethan and his work. Liv reveals that her father was always a workaholic who spent more time in the jungles of Africa than with his family. Classic dad. One year, he invited her to visit his station in Uganda, where they had a wonderful time together. She took several pictures of her father, as well as the herd of gorillas that he was tracking. But despite their close bond, Ethan refused to come back home and eventually started neglecting his family. Upon hearing this, Theo is shocked, and he realizes that he has a complex case on his hands. The following day, Theo returns to Harmony Bay with several pictures in his bag. He shows them to Ethan during their session and asks him to identify the subjects. These include the photo of Ethan's house in Miami, his workstation in Uganda, the gorillas he was tracking, and a childhood photo of Liv. Theo tells him that he has the opportunity to say something to his daughter. To everyone's surprise, Ethan finally speaks after not uttering a single word for more than 2 years. He longingly holds Liv's photo and says goodbye. An ecstatic Theo then jumps on this opportunity and proposes a deal. If he manages to cut the dosage of the psychiatric medication, then Ethan will have to tell him about his work with the gorillas. The latter agrees to the deal, but doesn't return the photo of his daughter. A few days later, Theo returns to the correctional facility and starts his one-on-one sessions with Ethan. This time, the guards agree to leave them alone in the storage room. Ethan then finally opens up about his work in Uganda. He describes the environment around the Virunga Mountains, where his base station was situated. Bananas everywhere. Following this, the movie cuts into a flashback. We see a slightly younger Ethan hiking several miles to the area of a tribe of gorillas that he has been tracking for several years. The beasts seem to know him, as they are already used to seeing him lurking around. Even the tribe's leader, a giant silverback gorilla, seems to have no problem with Ethan. As the days pass by, the anthropologist becomes emotionally attached to these magnificent animals. He stops going back to his base station and starts sleeping in the forest instead. The tribe also seems to accept him, and the leader begins looking after Ethan like he's one of their own. After this recounting of his initial work in Uganda, Ethan abruptly calls for the session to end. Theo allows him to leave and heads to the gymnasium where all the psychiatric patients are gathered. There, he sees mismanagement in the prison, the fights, the lack of staff, and prisoners getting hurt. Theo is so spooked by this that he runs away from the gymnasium. A few days later, he returns for another session with Ethan, who is now off the unreasonable amounts of psychiatric meds. This brings out the anthropologist's real character, an eloquent, extremely knowledgeable, but intimidating man. He continues with his tales about the travel in Virunga, where he became a part of the mountain gorillas. They accepted him, and in return, he learned the true meaning of peace. Ethan also saw the havoc wrought by humans, as several animals in the forest were poached by illegal smugglers. As time went by, the anthropologist discarded all of his material belongings, like a small sword, binoculars, and started living just like the gorillas. Unfortunately, the conversation takes a turn for the worse as Theo changes the subject. He asks why Ethan left his family and adopted the gorillas as his own kin. This question offends Ethan so much that he decides to terminate the whole session. He asks the psychiatrist to leave, but the latter insists on getting an answer for the question. Theo even reminds Ethan that he is in charge here, and he controls when the sessions end. Upon hearing this, our hero grabs Theo and pushes him against the table with surprising ferocity. The latter tries to free himself, but the old man seems to be extremely strong, even at that age. Ethan places duct tape on Theo's mouth, surprisingly, not gorilla tape, and doesn't let him speak. He then says how this whole concept of control is simply an illusion. If Theo was really in control, he should have been able to leave the storage room whenever he wanted, but he is now at the mercy of another man. After saying this, he eventually lets the psychiatrist go and removes the tape from his mouth. The encounter leaves Theo greatly stunned, and he wonders how Ethan has such an impeccable perspective on the idea of control. As the days pass by, Theo begins to understand the anthropologist's perspective more and more. It is humanity's obsession with dominion over the entire Earth and its organisms that has caused so much suffering to everyone. If humans could simply stop playing God, forsake the lust for control over everything, they would be more free. After gaining this insight into the mind of his patient, Theo's entire objective shifts. He now wants to know what led Ethan to murder those park rangers. This information could potentially help the anthropologist get a reduced sentence, or even be free from potential jail time. One day, Theo manages to get permission to take his patient to a nearby wildlife conservation center. Turns out Ethan used to work here several years ago. The two are left alone near a cage where a male silverback gorilla is kept for study. The sight of this majestic beast being mentally and physically broken down due to captivity touches Ethan. This seems like a bad idea. Finally, after hiding his story for so long, he agrees to recall the incident that led to the murders. It is then revealed that a group of forest rangers had found Ethan's belongings that he had discarded in the jungle several months ago. They had then tracked down the gorillas and saw them surrounding the anthropologist. The rangers unfortunately misunderstood the situation and began shooting at the animals. Ethan, who by now had become a part of the tribe, was incensed by the killing. In a moment of blind rage, he grabbed a nearby branch and brutally killed 2 rangers before eventually getting subdued. Back in the present time, Theo realizes that this testimony can help Ethan's case in the court. If he can prove that the violence was caused due to a misunderstanding, the old man may walk free. But it clearly wasn't a misunderstanding, so I don't know what the goal is here. Unfortunately, that night, the chief guard beats one of the prisoners who cannot fight back or speak for himself. Ethan watches this and is reminded of the time when his tribe of gorillas were shot dead by the rangers. He bursts out with anger and mercilessly beats the guard. Ethan is about to finish him off, but he is quickly separated by the other officials. In the aftermath of this event, Ethan's court hearing is cancelled, and he is given a lengthy sentence for assaulting an on-duty guard. Theo, who had grown extremely close to the anthropologist, later gets this news and is devastated. He realizes that Ethan will never talk to humans once more, and will spend the rest of his life in prison. The following day, Theo comes to the prison for a last-ditch effort. He wants Ethan to talk and put his side of the story in the court. However, the anthropologist has gone back to being the expressionless and mute personality. Theo gives up and thanks Ethan for teaching him how not to be controlled by one's own ambitions. He then breaks down in tears and gives a final farewell to his friend. Unbeknownst to him, Ethan doesn't plan on being captive in this prison. He has actually managed to steal a pen from Theo. In the next few weeks, Ethan begins to dig out the cemented area around the locks of the gymnasium's window. One day, while the guards are busy separating 2 quarreling inmates, he escapes through the broken window. The movie comes to an end as he can be seen walking in the forests of Virunga several days later. How did he get on a plane?